Illini Nation, here we are back again for another season of Champaign on Ice. And of course, nothing is right unless we got the man on here, the voice of the Fighting Illini, both football, but especially basketball. My partner in crime is sitting there with me tonight to talk some Illini basketball, Mr. Brian Barnhart. B, thanks for joining me, man.
Hey, no problem, Deon. Glad to do it. I like your background. That's cool.
Hey, you know I had to do a little something else to spice it up a little bit. Since I haven't been sitting on the sideline with you for a couple of games, I got to make myself feel like I'm back inside the State Farm Center. So I chose this background tonight just for me and you.
It's perfect. Perfect. Yeah, we're usually a lot closer than that. So
we are. We're normally shoulder to shoulder, man. I mean, yeah. But I tell you this, you and Doug, I listened to the last game. I tried to do the whole syncing up of the TV and the radio. I might have to ask some of our fans how they quite get it, where they can listen to turn the TV down and listen to us on the radio, because I couldn't do it. And it was driving me crazy because I had you and Doug in my ear 5 seconds behind everything that was taking place on TV.
Yeah, there's a method to it to get it all matched up, and a lot of people like to do that. So I think with technology today, there's just so many different ways the games can come in between the radio, live radio, and then of course the streaming that happens, and then of course wanting to get all of that matched up with what's on TV. And sometimes it can be tricky, but I know there are a lot of people that do it, and they figured it out. So I'm glad they did.
So there's a will, there's a way. Before we jump into Illinois, I just want to ask this question. In all of your years, you started off baseball, covering everything from the major leagues back to your dream job, as you told me, covering Illinois. Did you ever think we'd be streaming games? Did you see that one coming?
No. We, on our equipment back when I started, and I started in the early to mid 80s. I mean, it's the kind of stuff that shows up in museums now. Here's what we used to do in the olden days. And so that makes me feel kind of old, but no, our equipment wasn't nearly, you'd have like a phone and a cable to run it to a little Shure mixer and one headphone that had kind of a cheap little microphone attachment to it. And that was about what you had, and tape recorders. We can record everything with our phones now. When I interview Brad Underwood or other coaches, Chester or whoever, I mean, it's on my phone. Well, we had these big things you literally had to lug over your shoulder with like a backpack almost, with a microphone. And if your tape, your cassette tape worked properly, and was good quality, then you got a good interview. You hoped it didn't break. I mean, there's just all kinds of stories now. I mean, the way it is today, there's so many more ways that people can get the games and enjoy the games. And, they can, the varsity app that Learfield has, you can go back and get a game on demand. I can go back and listen to some game from, 3 weeks ago if you missed any of it then. So, yeah, it's changed a lot now. It's much better now.
Well, and that's one of the blessings of technology. I mean, it has allowed this game to be so accessible to everyone, whether you want to listen to it, watch it on your television, watch it on your computer, and as you mentioned, even on your phone. Now, speaking of watching games, I watched that last game against Penn State. Brian, I don't know if I have ever, well, I'm sure I have. I was very disappointed in the energy and the effort. I wasn't on the sideline. You and Doug were on the call. What did you think about the game overall in general?
Well, you played the game, so kind of practice and what shoot-arounds are good or bad. I've been around it now for 21 years at Illinois, and I don't always know, but I can usually read between the lines whether the coach feels like the game is going to be a good game or not so good game based on the practice, because as you play like you practice. And I had a sense that shoot around that morning wasn't very good. I just had that sense, and I could tell from Brad's body language and by the different things he was talking to the team about, that he was really worried about that game. And it was obvious that he was, and with good reason. And he saw it right away. And in fact, I think on the first possession, they tried to press, and somebody was in the wrong position right out of the gate. And so he was worried about it. He had the game circled when he saw where it fell. And of course, after Illinois won that game that you and I were at in Madison Square Garden, just a dramatic overtime win against the number 2 team in the country. I'm sure there's a lot of people that nationally people were reacting going, hey, Illinois should be in the top 10, or, this is the definite Big Ten champ, and look what they did. And I know Brad said, was after the game was like, we got to go to the next game. We got to get ready for it. And I don't know if they ever did. And I think that's what, with a coach like Underwood, and this, when a coach like Underwood, when he senses that the team either isn't locked in or isn't ready mentally to play the game, and then you play like he thought they might, it was really, really upsetting to him. When he came out for the post game with Doug and I, he was spitting nails. He was mad and really upset. And it kind of carried over to the post game press conference. Now, we had him on the radio show a couple of nights later, and he had calmed down quite a bit since then. But I think in the moment of that game and what he just witnessed really upset him, because he could see it coming. He tried to keep it from happening, and it happened anyway. And that's what was disappointing for him the most, for someone like him in his position.
Yeah, and I have to concur with that. That's coming off of emotional games like the Texas game is always hard. That next game is always hard. And when you're coming into a game against a Penn State team, which many of the guys were probably thinking, okay, well, you know what, we should be able to win this game. We beat Texas. Now we're coming up against Penn State. I remember having some of those same thoughts myself when, back when I was playing. You just started looking down upon other people. And I felt that was one of those things that kind of nipped them in the bud. And I think Coach, as you mentioned, recognized that as well, because he circled that game coming out of the Jimmy V's. If you circle that game, and then he mentioned in his press conference, the next 2 days in practice, he was kind of really on guys about being focused, being involved, being active, being leaders, playing with intensity and aggressiveness. And it did. It showed on the court. So I can understand he was human. I will say this. I wish I was in the post game at that time, because, Coach is very passionate about his players and about his team and about preparation, as you know. And for the guys to come out and lay a goose egg like that, I'm sure this week of practice, even with finals being in, has been interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure it has. And that's what's been tricky about it, too, is they had the game on a Saturday, and then they don't play again until this upcoming Saturday. And you throw in finals in the mix. So they, I think Wednesday, on the day we're taping this, they couldn't even practice because everybody had finals. So they basically had the whole day off. And I think he told us in the coaches show the other night, they didn't even look at the tape much of the Penn State game, because they just don't really have time with finals and then getting game prep ready for Alabama A&M. There wasn't a whole lot of time to do that sort of thing. So, it was it's one of those weeks where if you're going to lose that game, it was probably the poorest time to have that happen, because you've got all the other academic, which is what you're there for in the first place, is to get all the academic things in order. But then you're trying to regain your balance and get back on track at the same time. And so that's a tough mix for a team right now to try to get ready for the next game.
It is. And this is one of the, I know the fans won't understand this. Some will say that they do. This is probably the most difficult time of the year. Not the beginning of the year, not the end of the year, even though you have to go through that sludge of February, going into the tournament at the end of the season, when you're just like, oh my God, this has been so long. I think from a player standpoint, and also as a coach, this is the toughest time of the year, because you're butting right up against break. So the mentality is, oh man, we just need to get through these games. We're going on vacation. We got finals. We have all of these things coming up in front of us. You've been around this game long enough. Are you seeing maybe some of that possibility of some of that? I mean, I'm thinking not right now. I'm more afraid of this Alabama A&M game and the border wars, the bragging rights game, than I was the Penn State game. What do you think from what you've seen and where the team is right now?
Yeah, well, I think going into the season, and you and I had talked, and Doug had talked a lot about, I think trying what Brad was going to try to do was try to, bring in these new guys that had not been a part of our culture the last, few years, but had been part of winning cultures, but just not our culture. Mm-hmm. And I think that can be tough to get them to understand, what Illinois is all about. Matthew Meyer, and then he was caught a little bit, between not being able, once he left Baylor, not being able to practice at Baylor, being able to, practice with Illinois yet. He was late arriving, and so he had some issues to get through. And then, Shannon was a good player at Texas Tech, but he wasn't the go-to guy at Texas Tech. It was one piece of a larger puzzle. And so learning to be the lead dog, if you will, on the team. And then, Melendez is still only a sophomore and really hadn't played a lot of minutes. Hawkins is the most experienced, but even he was in and out of the lineup last year and had a difficult middle of the season. So throwing all those guys together and then trying to play a different offense than you had the last 3 years with Kofi. So that had to be different. And then you throw in all these freshmen, and they're talented, there's no doubt, but they're learning to play at this level, at the college level. Sky Clark's trying to learn to be a point guard on a Big Ten team in a Power 5 conference. Sincere Harris is full of energy, but he's got to learn how to score and where his spot is. Rogers the same way. So you mix all of that together. I thought that, if they could get through the first 10 games about 7-3, 8-2, I thought that'd be about where they probably will be. Although I have to say, I figured in my mind, I thought, well, Maryland would likely be a win because I didn't know what Maryland had. And I thought Penn State at home would be a win. And I thought they might struggle a bit against Texas and UCLA. Well, it happened all in reverse. They beat those teams, and then they stubbed their toe against the two teams that, they're either better than or playing at home and should have beaten. So I'm not surprised by where they are. And I think, Brad will use this time because they're only playing one game a week. I know the Missouri game's in the middle there too, but one game a week, Alabama, A&M, Missouri, and then Bethune-Cookman. So he's going to have some time to practice. And as you know, coaches love practice, players love games. And exactly. So I think he can spend some more time working on the structure of the team and role identification and, getting those guys more refined offensively because they reached a certain point, I think, in the fall. And then they had so many games that all you're doing is game prep and scouting reports. You're not really working on anything. So some of the things where they got exposed or where the other teams, the good teams, have shown where their weaknesses are, they've got to get that figured out. So I'm not surprised where the record is. I am surprised by who they defeated and who they lost to along the way. But I thought they might have some growing pains.
And I think you nailed it right on the head. I'm with you. I thought we would be 8-2. I thought maybe even I thought we would struggle against UCLA. Turns out that didn't happen. I really thought we'd struggle against an older Virginia team that showed its face. Did not expect the 2 Big Ten losses, as you mentioned. I knew Maryland would be tough because we've just struggled with Maryland at home. It's always been difficult there. But I thought and I still believe we're a better team than they are. If we played them twice, I think they come to Champaign and we beat them by double digits. I think the same thing with Penn State, that they just caught us on a down emotional low after such a high peak game against Texas. So it'll be interesting to see moving forward. And you're right, bringing in all these new pieces. Yes, we had 2 great transfers coming in. We have 4 really good freshmen. We're still missing Luke Goody. RJ Melendez is still finding his legs. And Coleman being the lone guy that played the most minutes. But like you said, he's been in and out of the lineup last year and then, of course, didn't play a ton as a freshman. this team is really coming together. And this is what I was talking to my producer before you hopped on. He asked me, he was like, well, what do you think, one of the problems is? That was one of the things that I mentioned. You got all these new pieces and this big wad of clay that you're trying to mold into a team, but you nailed it on the head. Less practice, and it's because there have been more games. I think this is a great time for Brad to be able to get some things together, be able to use some things in this Alabama A&M game going into the Mizzou game. And I know how professional, how much of a pro you are, as I was talking to Dane earlier, my producer as well. Have you started to take a look at the Mizzou prep yet?
Yeah, actually, I did a little work on that today. I've actually been working on Mizzou. I've been working on the bowl game a little bit, and working on Alabama A&M too. And I got Bethune-Cookman kind of waiting in the wings. So I'm kind of working on all those all at the same time. But yeah, Missouri is interesting because they've got transfers from Cleveland State, which is where their coach came from, Dennis Gates, Milwaukee, Clemson, Missouri State, Northern Iowa, and John A. Logan. So all these transfers coming in, and they're off to a 9. Well, they started 9-0. Playing some competition teams they should beat along the way, but then they did get a win in overtime at Wichita State, which I thought was noteworthy, and then Kansas beat them pretty soundly here just the other day in Mizzou Arena. So how are they as good as 9-1? I don't know if they're that good. Their schedule certainly has dictated, but they are playing at a high pace. They're averaging over 90 points a game. And, they got a new coach and a lot of excitement with it. And I think they play UCF on Saturday, the same day we're playing Alabama A&M. So we'll see how they do in that game in Miami. But I don't know. It's a hard game to kind of, because you've got a new coach coming in who probably doesn't, he's aware of the rivalry, but he hasn't been, embraced in it yet. Kind of like when Brad first came, you hear about it, but you don't really know it until you're in it. And then, see what kind of a crowd we get. I know the Illinois section, I think, is sold out from what I saw.
Yes, we are
in the Enterprise Center, and maybe they'll buy up more of the Missouri tickets, and maybe more Missouri fans will be fired up about their team, and we can get back to having 20 or 22,000 in there. Close to 20,000 as we used to. I know it fell off for a little bit there because both teams were struggling, but it'd be an interesting dynamic. Now we don't have Mark Smith anymore. We don't have Pickett there anymore. Some of the
don't have the backstories.
You're right. We don't have the backstories anymore, and Kwanzo's gone, so it's kind of a different angle to that game this year.
It is, but to me, and I'm sure you'll agree with this is one of the absolute best rivalries, and has been for a long time in college basketball. We were talking Missouri. Is there one or two players that has stood out to you? I know you haven't had a chance to watch video, but statistically, over these games, yes, they have not played a tough schedule, ran up against Kansas, and Kansas put them in their place. But they have, because I know Dennis Gates. I know Dennis from his time, growing up in Chicago. He's younger than I am, of course. And then he, of course, did a great job over at Cleveland State, winning their conference, I believe, twice. The regular season a couple of times during his time there. And then, of course, he was with Leonard Hamilton for many years. So, he's going to be defensive oriented. I don't know if that 90 points really shows it, but 90 a game, but, a defensive oriented coach. So is there any players that are standing out right now, since you've had a chance to take a look at them statistically, coming into the game next week?
Well, the one young man, Demoy Hodge, he comes in from Cleveland State, and he was the defensive player of the year in the Horizon. So he's brought that. He gets a lot of steals. He had 30 points in a game against SIU Edwardsville, so he's done that. They've got Brown back, Kobe Brown, who we do remember.
Okay,
senior. He's still back. Noah Carter is a young man that transferred in from Northern Iowa. He's been doing well. Another transfer from Milwaukee, DeAndre Golston, 6'5". He had a ball game earlier this year. Let's see, at 22 in a game against Houston Christian. So they've had some different guys step up, and there's another guy, Sean East, transferred in from John A. Logan. I know that's a school you're familiar with, the senior transfer there, and from Louisville, Kentucky. And he had, 17 points at Wichita State, 21, 6 assists in a game against Southeast Missouri. So it looks like, they've kind of patched together a team of different transfers from different schools, and the coach, Gates, brought in a handful from Cleveland State, and they were on some winning teams here the last couple of years, and so I mean they're off to a fantastic start. I think it's their first. Yeah. I think he's the. I looked it up. He's the coach to go 9-0 here out of the gate. The only other two that have done that here recently, Mike Anderson started 9-0 back in 06 and 07. Remember how he played? And Frank Haith started 14-0. Remember Frank Haith?
I do.
The name from the past. But
out of Miami.
Yeah, that's right. So they're off to a great start. And again, the schedule is probably nothing to write home about, but they do have the win in overtime at Wichita State, and Kansas. Kansas can do that to people what they did to Missouri, and they're probably somewhere in between that, I would think.
Okay. Well, one of the things, and you mentioned it earlier, that I think is going to be an interesting dynamic in this game while you and I are sitting there on the sideline. This team, meaning Illinois, most of these guys, with the exception of Coleman and RJ, have never played in a border war game. Or in a bragging rights game. So they don't understand the intensity of this rivalry. And I remember when we were talking about IO and those guys, their freshman year, how they didn't understand the intensity of this rivalry. And none of the guys on Mizzou's team, with the exception of one, understand this rivalry. So it's going to be interesting to see how that coalesces when they come together next Tuesday.
Yeah, one example, you're absolutely right. And that's always fun to watch, is the young guys. They get kind of wide-eyed out there the first time they're in that game, because it's like and Brad Underwood gave the example the other day, it's like the Army-Navy game the other day when the young man for Navy fumbled at the goal line, and how distraught he was because he felt like he had let down because Army came back and won the game. He was distraught, because he had cost his team the game. But I know you could tell by the way he was reacting, he had the sense that he lost it for the entire Naval Academy and all of those teams over the years. And I think that's the one thing that, and maybe you experience this as a player too, but I don't know if the players quite grasp what this game means to the fans and to the alums that have played in the game, and how much it means to them. To them, it's, Missouri's a rival. But then you get into that atmosphere and how electric it is when it starts, and it just kind of blows your mind, I think, as to, wait a minute, this is a really big deal. And then the older guys, as they play more years in that series, they can always teach the younger guys, okay, this is what it's about. This is a big deal. The coach can say it all he wants, but if you have the players telling them that, I think that drives home the point a little more. But they'll figure it out pretty quick, just based on the crowd.
They'll definitely figure it out quick. And if not, they will definitely hear about it for sure. But that's one of the great things. You mentioned me. When I played, I had an older team. I had Andy Kaufman, I had Larry Smith, I had Andy Petty, and guys that had been 2, 3, 4 years through that deal to really kind of impart on us about how important this game was. This team has Coleman. Coleman's quiet. It has RJ. RJ's quiet. Although Coleman has that fire underneath, he's not a get in your face kind of guy. Like, people didn't realize how Andy Kaufman was, when he had to get a point across, he got a point across. And you'd be like, oh my God, Andy's serious. So it'll be real interesting to see how these guys prepare coming into this game, especially, the Terrence Shannons who coach kind of put in the frying pan the other day about leadership. So it'll be great to see how those guys step up. Brian, I'm going to take a little bit of a twist here, because you mentioned it when you were saying you're getting ready for the bowl game. Sad passing, of course, of Coach Leach, from Mississippi State. But they've decided to go on and play this game. And they've, I guess, hired a new coach. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But How is Illinois looking prepared coming into this game? What do you see going into this bowl? Since we haven't been to one in a little while.
Well, we haven't been to a Florida bowl game since the 99 Micron PC Bowl in that game. Gosh. And then we haven't played in a January 1st or January 2nd, as the case is this year, Florida game since, I think, John Makovic. We were it was known as the Hall of Fame Bowl in about 1990. So it's been a long time.
I was going to say, that was my time, bro.
Yeah, I know. that's wow. That's how long it's been. But yeah, they'll be ready. What's going to be interesting is who's going to play in the game, because the trend has been, among especially the bowl games, the teams that aren't in the Final Four, the college football playoff, is if you're a Devin Witherspoon and you're projected to be a first-round pick, I can't really blame Devin for saying, you know what, I'm going to skip the bowl game. I'm going to get ready for my NFL career. I mean, if I was in that position, I'd probably think that way too. So I can't blame him for that. And I don't know what's going to happen with the Brown brothers. We'll see what they decide, if one of them plays, if one of them doesn't, or they both, decide to sit it out. That will probably determine part of how the game actually turns out. But Mississippi State's going to have guys like that too, probably on both sides of the ball. So, it may come out in the wash. And then you've got the added, not really distraction, but a change in that Ryan Walters is no longer, your defensive coordinator. He's the head coach at Purdue. And so, what does that mean? Who's going to run the defense in practice for the next couple of weeks? I'm sure the terminology and everything's going to stay the same. And then who's going to be playing in that game? Because we saw during the course of near the end of the season, especially in November, when they didn't have all those frontline guys out there, when Taz Nicholson went out and, Jennings went out, and we got a little further down the depth chart, Michigan State and Purdue took advantage of that in key moments and won those games. And so, can the guys that needed to fill in, can they step up into the roles if someone is not playing in the game? And so that bowl games are kind of a different animal unto themselves, partly because it is a reward for the last year, but it's also, coaches look at it as the launching pad for the next year. And so, they're going to what they call Devo guys, what Coach Bielema calls Devo guys, the guys that usually are on the show teams. Like in basketball, your backup guys that give you the scout on your opponent. Well, those guys in football, you can develop those guys a little more and look ahead to 2023 in this case and see what you have, but also reward the guys that played throughout the year and then are going to play in the bowl game. So hard to predict. I mean, Mississippi State throws the ball a lot. They've got, I was filling out my score sheet the other day. They've got receivers. Let's see. They've got receivers with 44 catches, 35 catches, 29 catches, 50 catches, 32 catches, 23 catches. The quarterback threw for over 3,700 yards.
Wow.
And he had 34 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. So it just shows you the Mike Leach offense, what do they call it? Air raid.
Air raid offense.
Somebody joked and said, Illinois is going to have to try to stop the run. And they meant like the run, the one running play that they have, and that's an exaggeration, but it gives you an idea of what they like to do. And, whether they're at a full complement of their receivers or, how they react to the passing of their coach. There's all kinds of intangibles because, unfortunately, in Illinois' case, and there's nothing you can do about it, but Illinois it's going to be the first game you turn on New Year's Day or January 2nd in this case. There's going to be Illinois on a national audience playing in a big bowl game on Florida. But in this case, it's going to be the Mike Leach game. I mean, that's what it's going to be. That's what the media is going to focus on, and certainly it should. But in this case, I hope Illinois doesn't get overlooked for the year they've had, because I think, to be in that position with 8 wins and a chance to win 9 with what they've done and all the honors they've gathered, and the fact that Coach Walters is now the coach at Purdue. And I mean, hopefully that'll come through in addition to all the remembrances of Coach Leach. You hope he can do both in that.
Yeah, I hope so as well. I mean, especially because you mentioned this is a great story. I'm sure Coach Bielema was in the conversation, especially for Big Ten Coach of the Year or some of these other honors. Of course, Harbaugh and they did their thing, but I'm sure love to hear his name mentioned at times this year. So it shows you how quickly he has turned things around in year 2 at Illinois, which is extremely impressive. But and I don't know if you have this information, but you mentioned 2023, and I do realize that signing day is coming up. Mm-hmm. Any insight to some of the guys we may be looking at or that may be joining the Fighting Illini next year?
Yeah, I don't know if I've got the names. I'll leave the recruiting service guys to follow that. But I know they really like the guys they've been looking at. And it's going to be interesting. Football recruiting is a little different than basketball recruiting in the sense you're dealing with so many more guys, whereas in a basketball class, you're dealing with 2 or 3. I mean, we're talking up to, 25 in a class or whatever it is you can get. And so I know they're really happy. They've been able to get a lot of interest from Illinois kids. Some of the schools that used to come in and, Iowa and Wisconsin and Michigan State and Minnesota and take kids out of Illinois. I think Brett Bielema is trying to lock down the state. And I think they've done a really good job of building those relationships with the coaches. Pat Ryan is a guy that was a longtime coach at Metamora. He's in charge of high school relations and keeping track of keeping in communication with all the high school coaches. And so I think they're going to have a really good recruiting class. And anymore, a lot of it gets done in December as opposed to February. February was the old, original day when everybody signed. And football recruiting is one of those things that people switch a lot. There's a lot of changes. We had a couple of guys in the last class that at the last minute, we didn't know we were going to get him. We were recruiting him, but we thought he was going to wherever. And so there's some of that you can't really control. But I think it'll be a good class. And I think, Brett Bielema has shown that, especially in the state of Illinois, that he wants to keep all the talent he can in the state. I think that's going to come out in this class.
And I agree. And one of the things I will say about Coach B is I know he's going to recruit well, but I know he's going to develop even better. I mean, to watch the guys on both sides of the football and how they have improved from the previous season was impressive. And I think that's what allowed us to get to this 8-3 mark that we're sitting at right now. As you mentioned, it would possibly getting win number 9, but it's development and growth. So I know he's going to keep pushing those guys. And anybody that comes in and joins the Illini Nation is joining the family, as you know. So, Brian, I appreciate you coming on. I know you have better things to do. You can be sitting with your lovely wife, Leanne, instead of sitting on here with my ugly mug. But I appreciate you, my friend, and I'm looking forward to seeing you this weekend. I know you have Doug on the call, but I'll be back because, as you see, I'm sporting my Illinois basketball alumni shirt on because it is reunion weekend for this Alabama state game. So we're going to have back a lot of the former, Alabama A&M. We're going to have a lot of the former players, managers, hopefully some coaches. And I heard we may even have a Mary Henson sighting.
Really? Okay. Well, she's got to be there with all those guys coming back. I mean, right?
Oh, no doubt. Got to have a queen in there, man. So, Brian, I appreciate you for joining me tonight again on Champaign on Ice. For the fans of the University of Illinois, thank you for joining us. Champaign on Ice was brought to you by my partners at BETRIVERS Sportsbook. Have to say thank you and take the hat off to them for continuing to support this platform. My friend, appreciate you and see you on Saturday.
Okay, sounds good, Deon. Thanks.
All right, buddy. Go Illini.
Go Illini.
There you go. I love to hear you say it.